The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms recently announced that the Supreme Court of Canada has declined to hear Sheila Annette Lewis's case against COVID-19 vaccine mandates for transplant candidates. We interviewed Sheila previously and will be publishing another full interview in the near future to find those and find out more about Sheila Annette Lewis, who is being denied a life-saving organ transplant exclusively because she wouldn't take the novel vaccine for COVID. Go to organsnotcoercion.ca. You can also follow that link to sign the petition that I hope to hand to our new health minister here in Alberta, Adriana Lagrange. Although the Supreme Court may not have come through for Sheila, countless individuals are now showing their support directly to Sheila and her family, who have set up a Give, Send, Go in attempts to seek a transplant by way of hospitals in the United States, which do not require these same novel vaccine requirements. The crowdfunding effort can be seen at givesendgo.com/GAMM5. To find out how we got this dismissal by the Supreme Court and what it means for Sheila, today we discuss this case with lawyer Allison Pejovic, who, in working with the JCCF, has fought for Sheila in this lawsuit that was first fielded in Alberta's Court of Queen's Bench.
Hi, I'm Allison Pejovic. I'm an Alberta lawyer who has been funded by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms to represent a client named Sheila Annette Lewis, who since 2021 has been battling for her life against AHS and a group of transplant physicians in Alberta. And she has been, she was on the high priority transplant list as she's terminally ill with a disease. Unfortunately, she doesn't have long to live, and she was ready to get a transplant in 2021 and was informed in March that she would have to get the COVID-19 vaccine. And she was unsure of the safety profile because it was so new. And she had a very strong conscience played into it, and she decided she didn't want to take the COVID-19 vaccine. And they told her, her physicians told her, that she would be removed from the high priority transplant list. And so she was desperate, as she obviously wants to survive, but was afraid to take the COVID-19 vaccine. It was a crisis of her conscience, and she wanted to have bodily autonomy. So she reached out to us in the summer of 2021, and we have taken various steps to try to get a win for her in using the charter to get that policy overturned. But unfortunately, we were unsuccessful at the Alberta Court of King's Bench in June of 2022. Alberta Court of Appeal, unsuccessful there as well on appeal in October of 2022. And then in January, we filed a leave, it's what's called a leave to appeal application to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is not the actual appeal, but it was an application which asked them to hear the appeal, because unlike at the Alberta Court of Appeal, where she had an automatic right to appeal, the Supreme Court of Canada does not take every case. It doesn't take most cases that come across its desk. And we put our best foot forward, and we developed some what we thought were compelling arguments as to why this is a case of national importance. And we just found out last week that the Supreme Court of Canada has decided not to hear her case. They dismissed her leave application and awarded a cost award against her. So here we are. Unfortunately, Ms. Lewis is not able to appear before the Supreme Court of Canada and have the highest court in Canada determine whether she's entitled to relief under the charter against these transplant doctors and against AHS, and whether or not her charter rights have been infringed. So this is a very difficult time for Ms. Lewis, and but you know, she's come a long way, and she's definitely stood very, very strong and tall against what she felt was a unconstitutional policy.
Well, and if I can ask about the Supreme Court of Canada, dismissed with costs to the respondents, Alberta Health Services and the ABC Hospital. I imagine that's just an added blow at the end of the day, is it not? Well, especially for Sheila.
Absolutely. I mean, AHS asked for costs. They had never asked for costs in the lower courts, but they asked for costs here, and we responded in writing before this decision came out that this is completely inappropriate cost award, because this is, if anything, is in the public interest. Somebody fighting for their very life in the face of what they believe is an unconstitutional policy put in place by the state. This is not appropriate to award costs against someone like Miss Lewis, and yeah, she's definitely distressed over the cost award against her.
Well, and just so that we can go back a little bit to the beginning. It's my understanding, as based on our last conversation, that there were three unwritten policies that this all kind of stems from. It was the one unwritten policy that AHS was funding the organ transplant program, and then two unwritten policies, both from AHS and from the ABC doctors, I believe it was, that the COVID vaccine would have to be had for Sheila to get this transplant. Is it still the case that this is all unwritten? Is that correct? My understanding.
Yes, there was actually a written policy early on before the doctor said she had to get the vaccine. AHS had a policy which said that the vaccines were strongly recommended before transplant. Then the doctors told her she needs to get the transplant, but that was never in writing. That was just an oral conversation. And then by the time we were ready to go with a lawsuit in the fall of 2021, she had one last meeting with her transplant physicians before we filed our notice of application for the first time. And one of the transplant doctors told her, and he actually wrote this down in his medical notes, and it made its way to one of the doctor's affidavits. And so the court had this evidence. Doctor said, AHS is now requiring all transplant candidates get the COVID-19 vaccine. And so that point in our argument, because it was right there in the affidavit and the medical notes, this became an AHS policy. It was never written. That we've asked repeatedly for a copy of a written policy, and they have not provided one. But there was evidence at the cross-examination of one of the AHS transplant administrators. She testified that the Alberta hospital that we were also suing had finished their policy by April of 2022. And we've asked for copies of that, and that was never provided. So AHS did have a policy. They continue to assert that they don't, but the evidence is contrary to that assertion. And unfortunately, that Alberta Court of Appeal decision, which basically says that AHS is just copying the doctor's policy, that stands, because we were not allowed to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. But because there was never a written policy shown to us, we don't know what the doctor's policy actually was, other than the oral conversation that she had had with her physicians. There was nothing in writing, and so AHS's was never in writing either. So there's a real injustice here, not just for Miss Lewis, but for any transplant candidate wanting to know what they have to do to get a life-saving organ. Are there any exceptions? We know that they're willing to make a medical exception for somebody who has an allergy to one of the vaccine ingredients. They admitted that. But what about natural immunity? She's provided evidence of natural immunity with a lab report from a reputable lab in BC, which showed that her blood has robust antibodies to COVID, and that she's had COVID twice. She provided that evidence to her transplant doctors in March of 2023. And the response back in a phone call was, well, yeah, we've read the report, but the report says that you need a booster. It doesn't say that. And, you're only immune for 2 years. Well, her natural immunity from the report said that she had COVID in September of 2021. 2 years from that date would be September of 2023. So basically, they've acknowledged that she'd be immune until September of 2023. So why aren't they letting her have the organ right now? We've got every day that goes by. Ms. Lewis her life could be saved with an organ that she needs, and they're still refusing. And that is completely deplorable behavior.
What checks and balances are there? If, I mean, all the way up to the Supreme Court, they're not going to say that there's any charter protections.
Yeah, so I mean, that's as the Alberta Court of Appeal upheld that decision. So that in Alberta, that is the law now. But her recourse at this point, I understand she's going this way with a legal counsel who has an experience in pursuing medical malpractice claims. And that his name is Umar Sheikh, and he is pursuing a claim for her in negligence and medical malpractice. I won't speak any further about that, but that is the direction that she's going, because the constitutional argument, it's over here.
And to be clear, that is a separate legal action. And it is fair to say that the JCCF's work, I mean, there isn't much that can be done on this particular case that you have been working on because of the Supreme Court's decision. That's right. That's where it falls, right?
That's right. Yeah, we've done everything that we could. We pushed the latest test result with her natural immunity, honestly believing that that would be a game changer, because doctors have an oath to save lives and to do no harm, and there's no scientific reason at this point to deny her a transplant, according to that medical report and according to the expert opinion we heard in this case from qualified, very experienced immunologists on both sides who acknowledge that natural immunity exists and it has protective value. Miss Lewis is very, very brave, and this case has really shown a black mark on our medical system, and she will be remembered one day for fighting and standing up for freedom in the most the most tragic situation and set of circumstances. Thank you.
Before we conclude this report, it's worth noting that Chief Justice of Canada Richard Wagner disavowed objectivity and impartiality when he publicly announced a COVID-19 vaccine mandate in the Supreme Court. I want to thank you all for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Sydney Fizzard. As a final note, I want to remind you that there is a Give, Send, Go set up for Sheila, and if you wish to donate directly to her cause, go to givesendgo.com/GAMM5. And if you want to see more of our reporting on Sheila Annette Lewis, go to organsnotcoercion.ca.